So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Northampton Museum. We're not expecting any fire alarms today, so if the alarm does go off, the nearest fire station, get the way down with the car park, please. And I'm very pleased to welcome Adrian Constable, who's going to be talking to us about Brooch for Life and Death. This is the result of the research he carried out under Master's into medieval archaeology, I'm going to say. Excellent. Which he received distinction and was nominated for the Jeff Egan Prize. So over to you, Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about early medieval brooches, and the reason I'm here is because, because of the help of this museum that went towards part of my research, basically. I'm really grateful to Northampton Museum for one having such a wonderful collection that helped me kind of put together the research that I'm about to present to you today, but also just being really encouraging and lovely and allowing me to come and talk to you about this as well. Because there's a lot of museums have these wonderful, wonderful collections that are kind of stored away and don't necessarily get pulled out and analysed very often, but they're there and they're wonderful, and I've been able to make use of some really nice different collections all across Yorkshire and Northamptonshire to kind of put together this bit of research. So I'd like to say I'm very, very thankful for your help as well in this and kind of what it's come to, because the dissertation was nominated for a Finds Prize, which is about research to do with finds in the medieval period. And it wouldn't have got to that stage had it not been for the help of lots of lovely museums, particularly in essence, this study is kind of about what we can tell from the sources that we have when we pile as many sources together as possible to kind of build as big of a picture as possible. So by that I mean I'm using not only the fantastic evidence that we've got here in museum collections like the Brooches Museum from various different archaeological excavations and Anglo-Saxon cemeteries predominantly, that kind of environment, but also what happens when we add to that all the metal detecting evidence that we've got and all the other different kinds of sources that are starting to become more and more useful when we've added the pieces together that we've got in order to build up a really lovely big picture of kind of life and people of the eras that this illuminates. So yes, I was looking at early medieval brooches. So my time period is the year sort of 400 until the year 1066. So we're right in that sort of country building and migration period and huge systems of change that sweeping across the country. So this is the period that I wanted to analyse. This is the period that all my evidence that you'll see is going to come from. Yeah, about the year 400 AD. So just after the Romans have left to 1066, when we get the next biggest change in terms of material culture and Normans coming into. Okay. And yet my specific area is Yorkshire and Somerset. Really nice big area. Well, next time. So what I'm going to talk to you about basically is kind of the who, what, where, how, when, why I had to do a study in this in the first place, what I was studying, and why it's relevant. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how I came to the conclusions that I did and what the results were and why I think the results came out the way they did. But this is the area that I'm talking about basically. These are all the sites that I used in my database of my research. So we've got all of the black spots on this map are all metal detected finds. And so they came from the portable antiquity scheme. And all the pink ones are all the archaeologically excavated or more formally excavated sites that contributed. So the ones that you're more familiar with here are the ones that are in the Hidden Valleys exhibition things here at the museum, are the ones that are in this region here. And we've got things like Storthick Cemetery, Cleetham Cemetery, those kind of places that are on the top, which is part of the fabulous evidence I got from these guys here at the museum. So, next slide. So the hypothesis was basically that people in the early medieval era were buried with different accessories to the ones that they wore during life. So to kind of explain what I mean by that, there was for a very long time only really one source of archaeological evidence for the Anglo-Saxon people for this entire time period. Basically, if you wanted to know about the people, the best source of evidence would be cemeteries, and it would be graves, and it would be the grave goods and the personal things that they were buried with, that all came from basically those contexts and only those contexts. And it started being researched a good 150 years ago or so by the antiquarians of the area, who started opening up barrows and finding these graves and finding cemeteries and things. But in terms of other forms of evidence, other pieces of life, we really didn't have any for a long time, or at least very little in comparison to the huge wealth of evidence for the entire country, basically, that just came from cemeteries, it just came from dead people, it just came from the graves. So there was an assumption for a very long time that whatever a person was buried with must have something to do with their life story. It must represent them as a person, and that would follow them into the grave, kind of thing. So we would kind of read burials as those piecing together their lives. And it wasn't until a little while later, it wasn't until some different sort of philosophical thinking came in the sort of 70s to 80s in archaeological thought and archaeological theory, that determined that actually probably what we were seeing is whatever the person burying them wanted to be seen, and not necessarily an entire picture of that person's life. And this was based on a lot of different kind of sociological elements and a lot of different kind of thought strains from different disciplines as well. But certainly you can kind of see it today, and we can see it in the later medieval period as well, that a grave site and the whole funeral practice really was more orchestrated than honest. So the idea that the Anglo-Saxons buried a life story was starting to be questioned. We started to go, okay, we've only got one source of evidence for this. How can we tell that this is the person's entire life? So it starts to be more and more relevant to funerary archaeology and funerary archaeology discussions to say whatever we can see at the graveside is only what they want us to see. And you can't trace that backwards, basically back into that person's life. You can't really get an honest picture. So that's the hypothesis that we're working with here. And that came from a really good study in 2010 by two chaps called McLean and Richardson, who were some of the first to really recognise that the PAS, the portable antiquity, the metal detecting work that was happening, could be a really valuable source of evidence, and that it was disproving some of what we thought as well, because it was coming up against the weren't expecting. So McLean and Richardson in 2010 were the ones that did the study that my study is kind of based on. So 14 years later, I've kind of come back to their thoughts and kind of gone, okay, so let's reassess this. Is it true? Is their understanding true? Is it still true today like it was 15 years ago? What they were thinking. Because they had a database for the south of England, mainly around Kent, of evidence that came from archaeological excavations, and then they compared it to the database that came from waterborne antiquities, so metal detected finds. And they found that there was significant differences in what they were expecting the metal detectors to find versus what they were actually finding. And it mainly meant that the types of brooches that archaeologists thought were quite fancy, took a lot of work, took a lot of effort, and were therefore rarer, were actually a lot more common than we thought they were, was one of their main findings. Was the archaeological evidence was showing a distinct type of material culture, a distinct type of dress accessories from the graves, and metal detectorists were finding above and beyond the amount of different approaches and different styles of things than we were expecting. And particularly it's to do with crucible roaching and annular roaching. But that's kind of where my research jumps from. Because at the time that they were looking at the PAS, there was overall around about 200,000 items that have been recorded by metal detectors onto this database, which is their national database. And at the moment, today, or last year at least, there's just over 1.7 million items have been recorded onto the portfolio. So this was a kind of way of bringing this up to date as well, to kind of see if these trends continue. So their conclusion was that the differences in what the metal detectorists were finding versus the archaeologists were finding was that the portable antiquity scheme could represent a piece of life that we can't see in grey, a piece of life that we just weren't getting. We were getting maybe accidental loss, daily use of items that they kept with them, kept with the living and didn't bury. So it kind of highlighted how potentially we got a huge amount of missing evidence if we ignore the method, if we ignore what's being found. Right? So that's the focus for the book. Next. So the aims and the objectives of this was one, to determine the differences in the brooch types between the PAS and the archaeological pipeline, and compile a database, because there wasn't yet one for this area. There wasn't yet one for Yorkshire and side. They, back in 2010, used one that had been compiled by a few different museums in Kent in order to have a list of archaeologically found items. But there's very, very few places in the UK where a database like that already exists. Yorkshire is not one of them, so I made one myself. And to contextualise into time periods, one of the reasons why I went for such a long time period, from literally 400 up to 1066, is because we've got such huge changes in material culture happening during that time. We've got huge changes in, firstly, the migration of all this new material culture coming to the UK from the Anglo-Saxon, the Jews, all these people moving around across the Channel, but also a lot of movement within the UK as well, because of the Romans going away and because centres of industry and centres of habitation moving because of the Romans being so cool. And then later on, by a couple of hundred years, you've got the conversion of Christianity, which causes a huge change in material culture. It causes people to no longer want to bury and raise the same things that they used to. And then you've got the Vikings coming in and their change to the material culture and then their conversion to Christianity. So that all happened within that 600-year time period, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go for that entire stretch of time, to see if I could get the differences between all those influences, and then try and see it, and if I could draw together what that meant for what we're talking about. So the brooch at the top here is an annular brooch. This is one of the ones I'm going to be talking about particularly today, because this is absolutely 100% for this area the most common brooch that was found in graves. This is what people were wearing, and very often the style that it'd be worn in is one of those on each shoulder, which is a style that's associated with what's called a peplos dress. And it's a dress that is basically a tube of material that we're assuming they would kind of step into, with a strap at the back and a strap at the front. You pin those two straps, front and back, together with one of these annular brooches. Sometimes it's a different brooch. If you're in the south of the country, it would be more like this one, which is a disc brooch. There are lots of different styles of disc brooch. The phrase disc brooch gets applied to about 6 different styles of brooch, if you break it down stylistically to be more specific to the area. But effectively, if you're around the Thames Valley, you would be expecting to see people with these saucer brooches or disc brooches on either side of their dress. And if you're up here in where we are now in this area, you would be expecting to see them with annular brooches on either side of them, or potentially crucible brooches, which is the next set of brooches I'm going to be talking about. So this is one of the most important ones. This is one of the ones that archaeologists will find in is the annular brooch. Then this one I've got here just so what mainly because it's pretty, but also because this particular brooch is called a radiated brooch, and it's one of the reasons why we now think that PAS could be really influential to our understanding of dress accessories in particular. Because before the PAS came about, it started in 1997 and has kind of grown and grown from there. It became a national organisation just a few years after that. And now it has 1.7 million items in it for the whole of England. But radiate-headed brooches were considered really rare. We thought they only basically came in Kent, that they were a French sort of import that maybe got replicated in a few places in the very southeast England, but we didn't think they were very common. The PAS has pretty much tripled our knowledge of these brooches. They really weren't being found by archaeologists, but they absolutely are found by metals. Just one of the really interesting things about drawing together all these different sorts of function. So yeah, for our understanding of what people were wearing. So yeah, the method basically was to compile a database, which is where I started getting in touch with a lot of people here, emailing them and going, can I have your brooches, please? Can you tell me all the things? What have you got? Rifling through their pockets, so taking brooches I knew that were particularly fucking. Which is lovely, and I got to chat to them really nice, nice places. And yeah, then became the more difficult task of sort of going through every reference that I could find to any excavation, any site that might have something that was useful to me, even if they came 150 years ago from the antiquarians, even if you didn't know where they were now, and trying to compile them all and trying to cross-reference them so that I knew what I had in my database and the right stuff to have in the database. And then organise them by type. There was a lot of different brooch types, and there was a lot of different ways that people were describing the brooches as well, which made it slightly confusing. So in order to clean up all the data I had, particularly on the PAS, actually, there's an awful lot of people who are inputting different things that they're finding, and there's not always consistency as to how they're writing things down. So there can be quite a lot of sort of decoding of what's been written through the course of antiquity scheme by the lovely finance liaison officers, by the museum officers, by people themselves who are finding things and then recording them to work out what it was that we had in there. And because so much of the course of antiquity scheme was broken or fragmentary, I then decided that what we needed to do, for some forms of analysis, just to help them out, was to really make it simple and really refine it down again into just 4 broad categories of brooch. So you've got the long brooches, which is like the reindeer head one that I showed you before, but also the cruciform brooches and small brooches and things that I'll show you in a second. The torus ones, basically torus is a fancy word for donut shaped. So that became the annular brooches, but also the penannular brooches, which is like an annular that doesn't quite meet all the way around. It's got the break in it. And the disc brooches. So self-explanatory. And then other. So there are some fascinating brooches, particularly when the Scandinavians come to that are shaped like S shapes and birds. And there are some brooches in one particular village that I found. They seem to really, really like a style of brooch called a safety pin brooch, which is kind of as described. It literally looks like a safety pin. And I found there's more in that village, that one village, of that type of brooch than pretty much anywhere else in the whole of Yorkshire and Hunterside. For some reason, that one village really like that one brooch. But that's the kind of thing that all went into the other sort of category. I think they also do, because you can, one of the ones we think about BAS is that there are grid references associated with almost every find, every record. So spatial analysis that is one of the major benefits that could happen if we start to see more and more of what I think you see elements, which is brilliant. So I'll show you the map of that side of that. And then yeah, we will keep the data manufacture. So typologically and stylistically, a lot of these brooches get put into these categories of when they begin to be used and when they end to use it. And the annular brooch is one of the ones where actually it's used for a ridiculously long time. It's basically used from the time when the Romans left, pretty much for about 1,000 years. It's used well into the medieval period, as we know, so well into the sort of 1500s as well. That annular brooch, that gift take on, Torah shape one, sorry, is super common. Just carries it seems like it's a really reliable, really like brooch, and you can fancy it up and make it plainer as well. So this is kind of where this is my start point of how I did have what I was. So yeah, the data set, this is how this is the in pure numbers, this is how they have that. So the PAS data set is 841 items that I got from the 4550 team website. So like I said, most of them are fragments. A huge variety of them come from basically just cloud fields and things like that. So unfortunately, time has just kind of broken them down. It may have been that they were in fragments to begin with when they entered the ground. It may very well be that we can get a lot of scrap metal as well with these kind of things, and so that's something to bear in mind. That is then kind of scattered, and it may very well be that these were broken and then fell into the ground type thing. So the fact that pretty much the vast majority of all of the records from the PAS were either pieces like this, or pieces like this, which cut basically between, 10% of a brooch to maybe 50% of a brooch is the most common amount that they can find things like that. So again, this is why it helps to kind of have these really broad categories to make them fall into, because it wasn't necessarily possible to identify specifically what brooch it was for something. But yes, we had 29 types of brooch that came from the PAS. And those are my search parameters. So if you wanted to go onto the PAS data set and find the examples that I used for my study, you absolutely could. It really is open to anyone to go and use. They hide certain pieces of information, like the exact grid locations where they're found, but basically they want anyone to be able to go onto this database and be able to look at what's found in their region or nationally, and have a look at some of the examples and have a look at some the decorations. Some of the photos go really nicely detailed, so you can go and see what people are finding on those details, which is absolutely wonderful. And then yeah, my data set, I managed to compile 1,010 brooches from all these different sources. Museums, the catalogues, also the HERs, the heritage gateways, and those kind of things, all the records, all of that. And there were 27 different types that I managed to find from my database. And then I organised those into where I could. I organised them into where they come from, what kind of context they come from. So whether or not they come from a cemetery and a grave site, whether they come from a settlement, or whether we just couldn't tell and maybe the records had been lost, but there was a brooch, we just didn't quite know where it had come from, which unfortunately is the case with some of the ones that were found 150 years ago by the antiquarians. They liked to go and sort of do these investigations by themselves wherever they were, dig a little hole in the ground, and they didn't necessarily either keep the brooch, they might trade it on to someone else or give it to their local museum, or keep very good records about what they found. So there's some things that we just weren't able to know. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to try and be able to compare whether or not there was a difference or a similarity between the contexts. Is there a group of evidence that looks like a cemetery group of evidence versus is there a group of evidence that looks like a settlement group of evidence? So is there going to be a collection where you can look at it and go, that's a settlement collection versus this is a grave collection, that kind of thing. Because part of what Richardson and McLean's study suggested was that the PAS were coming up with a completely different, or should be coming up with a completely different set of items to a grave. So they should be able, in theory, to tell the difference between the collections when they based on the types of collection. So yeah, the thing is with mine, I find this really interesting, and it helps that we can now do some really good sort of like specific analysis on these things. But overall, it's quite a surprise that out of those 1,010 items, 765 of them, so the vast majority, 76.5% basically, of my database came from just graves. And then of those, 577, so still over half of the data set came from just 8 cemeteries. And the ones included in this are quite big ones. Some of them are in places like Clifton, which is massive. And Sawcliffe is in there and places like that, but also West Heslington, which is just north in North Yorkshire, which is quite a big cemetery. But it kind of shows where still the vast majority of our evidence for this entire period is coming from. It is all still coming from these graves. And some of them are excavated a really long time ago as well. And we just haven't been able to catch up in terms of analysing these settlements or finding settlements. Where these people were living is still a bit of a enigma to us. What a Anglo-Saxon settlement should look like, we kind of know. But what's in those settlements in terms of material culture, we still have some blank spots. We just haven't found enough of them in order to be able to tell whether the ones that we've found are normal. So I'll come back to that, but the settlements evidence gives me a little bit of pause. I think it's an interesting case study, but I don't know how much it tells us because we don't yet have, I think, enough to be able to draw. So yeah, 765 of my brooches came from graves, 147 of my brooches came from settlements, and 98 came from sites that couldn't be contexted. Okay, so that's the kind of breakdown that we're working with there. So, yeah. Okay. So yeah, the result. Ready? So in the compiled data set, which is the one that I made, that's my one that I made, 44% of them were annular brooches. So they're these lovely donut shaped brooches. 37.8% of the PAS data set, so this is the metal detected ones, they are all cruciform ones like that one up there. So the style is completely opposite each other, basically, I would say. The styles are utterly different. So why? Why do people get buried with seemingly an entirely different set of dress accessories than the ones that are potentially being worn and lost and scattered and broken and used during their day-to-day life, that then the metal detectors are coming along and finding out? That was one of my real surprises, and it turned up really quite early on into my research, and then just kept going. Basically, the statistics for both of them began when I had half as much of the database, when I had about one site's worth of brooches in my database. But West Heslington, for example, I got 140 brooches from West Heslington, and 104 of them are angular brooches. So the vast majority, when you look at specific cemeteries, are one type of brooch, versus the vast majority when you're looking at just out and about casual finds with a metal detector are a completely different style. So yeah, as I said, with the PAS data set, there are some difficulties with the typing, because they're so fragmentary and things like that. So bear in mind that we've got, yes, an overabundance or an over-representation of one style, but there's also individual fragments. So it might mean that we just got the type of brooch, as in this style, this long style of brooch, rather than necessarily that particular brooch, for example. And this basically completely backs up the 2010 study that was looking at Richardson. Their results were very, very, very similar. Their data sets were a lot smaller because it was 14 years ago and there weren't nearly as many things on the PAS. But pretty much the statistics kind of follow what they were finding. And that research, and originally, yeah, basically came from what people were bringing to museums, what people were bringing to Kevin Davey here in Sunbelt, and what people were bringing to a few of the different Norfolk museums and things. It was literally the people in the museums were kind of finding these lovely treasure coves where it was, so we know all this. Doesn't make sense, but it has, so we still got that today. So yeah, just to kind of visualize them slightly differently, this is kind of what they break down to if you look at them as these big categories of type, overarching and type. And I think it puts it in a really stark contrast. So yeah, you've got my data set on this side. We've got the different contexts as well that they're found in. So you've got grave, settlement, etc. And then these ones that appear on the side. So yeah, it's just got up there, but it's 72.7% of the PAS data set is all the long style. So that's the cruciform ones, but the other ones also fit into that category, like the radiate heavy brooches that I showed at the beginning. And the small long ones and things like that, that's like different, but we've got examples of. And then yeah, the Taurus ones in my data set overwhelmingly are the biggest. So in terms of what I was saying about breaking down the context, you can kind of see here as well that they don't align either, which gives us again more questions than answers, but there are possible reasons for that. So if the PAS represented settlement, we might expect that the settlement proportions would be similar to the PAS proportion, right? Because that might suggest that what's being found by the metal detectorists comes from settlements that we haven't found yet. They don't seem to match at all either. It doesn't even match the uncontexted category, which again, it was kind of just casual loss, not necessarily associated directly with the settlement. But when people are just sort of out and about and they just happen to lose things, it also doesn't match that. So we now have, a few more questions to investigate, a few more lines of inquiry to kind of go down if we wanted to really explore that. But it does seem to me that one of the best things we could do with PAS if we got really reliable geomapping, geospatial mapping for this evidence would be to explore whether or not when people are just out and about walking down trackways and things like that, that's where they're losing things, actually, that's where they're breaking things. Because one of the reasons why that was given for why the settlement evidence, one, wouldn't have a huge amount of brooches and things like that, but two, wouldn't necessarily match the PAS evidence. It's because if someone's wandering around in a settlement and they're looking at the ground, they're just far more likely to find lost metalwork like brooches and things like that. And we know from various different metallurgical analysis that's been done on brooches that they recycled metal a lot. Any usable metal that maybe had, finished its purpose or broken or whatever it was, if it could be melted down and reused, it was. Categorically it was. So it's quite probable that just in terms of settlements alone, one, we don't have enough of them. We've only got 7 or so settlements in this area. But two, that people just walk around and find metal and pick it up and go, maybe hand it to the blacksmith and go, here, we've got a couple more bits for you. Or again, if you're in a settlement and your brooch falls off, maybe you are just more likely to pick it up yourself, and if it's broken, get it repaired, that kind of thing. Or it's beyond use. You'd have a place for it, I think. Because they're just really not very many of any of the types of brooches that come up in the other categories in the settlement. Versus, if you're out and about just wandering down the trackway, or maybe you're helping in fields, or if you happen to be lucky enough to have a horse at this time of period and things like that, and your brooch falls off under that circumstance, you're far less likely to be able to go find it again, which means that it would probably turn up in our current plough soil and not be recovered in the same way. So that's a little bit of kind of what we can draw out from some of the context of this as well. But over like far and away, the grades are still sort of the main source of evidence that we're going for, but they really create a kind of disputed types that we're just not getting from other places. So, wow, this is the kind of when we get into the theories that might just stay theories forever, we might never be able to prove, but then that's what as to kind of potentially what's happening. So I came up with 3 theories or 3 groups of theories as to what I thought was kind of happening, and then you can kind of choose your favourite, basically. So I've got a pragmatic theory, and a hypothetical theory, an observational theory, and then I've got my favourite one personally that I think fits a little bit of the other principle through. So pragmatic. And this was put forward in the original study as well by McLean and Richardson. The archaeologists and metal detectorists just aren't finding the same thing. Baseline, they're just not picking up the same forms of evidence. And there was a few different kind of backwards and forwards with this, and some that they suggested and then debunked themselves immediately in their original study too. Because one of the things that people were saying was, okay, so if you've got an angular brooch, it's about that big, and it breaks, are the fragments of that just so small that a metal detectorist won't find them, compared to what's in theory a far more substantial lump of metal, even if it breaks from a cruciform brooch or something like that, just because they're longer and they've got this bigger surface area, if it breaks, maybe it will find them. Immediately, unfortunately, you can put paid to that one, because metal detectorists often find tiny, tiny pieces of quarter cut pennies from medieval era and things like that. So just saying that something's too small to find with a metal detectorist is almost a challenge. It's not, it doesn't quite bear out. And the other thing that they're saying is that, archaeologists, if you're looking in a grave, it's, a 6 foot by 2 foot square that you're then going over with a fine tooth comb, basically, then maybe you would just pick up different things to a metal detectorist who's got a 6 acre by 2 acre field to kind of just go on the sweep his metal detector. I think it's just going to miss some of the other things. But again, if metal detectorists are picking up pennies that are the size of that, kind of way that the other one with that was that in the original study, Maclean Richardson went out to do metal detecting rallies and basically asked whoever was there to pick up absolutely everything, anything and everything, so that they didn't even have the bias of maybe metal detectors walking along going, oh, that's not worth it. Like, they literally asked the metal detectors to pick up everything and put it in a box so that the archaeologists could then go through and see if they could see what they wanted to, pick up as the annular brooches. Don't even find them. Generally, they won't give that. Occasionally, there will be a piece of them, but certainly not enough to write the numbers, the statistics, and the proportions. They just weren't there. So, pragmatically, all of these hypotheses may have some weight towards the overall reasoning, but none of them seems to sway the whole problem. So the hypothetical one, which is the one that they put forward for the original study and may never be able to prove it, but it's a really interesting thought, is that maybe metal detectorists and PAS just represent a context that is completely sort of ephemeral, a context that you would never be able to pick up archaeologically, because there's no way that an archaeologist could thoroughly excavate a huge area like a trackway or like an early medieval field system that would then pick up the types of accidental loss and breakage that the PAS and the metal detectorists speaking over a whole field might be able to pick up in a different way. So maybe PAS does represent the context that we would not be able to identify archaeologically. Just as simple as that. It's a different part of life for the Anglo-Saxon people, in that they are wandering around, they are breaking things, they are losing things, and that's impacted by it. But archaeologically speaking, because we can actually analyse quite short areas, we just wouldn't see it. The space is just too vast. So observational, and this is one that I think quite a lot of people resonate with. The observational, based on purely in grades you get different things to the PAS and to settlements, people are just simply being buried with different things to what they would have worn during life. That's based on purely observation, different, therefore different. And certainly today, anecdotally, at least, you can add in evidence that you wouldn't necessarily, if you were going to go to a funeral, you wouldn't expect to see someone be buried in what they would wear every day. We've got this kind of culture now, and certainly they had it during the medieval era as well, after the Normans came and changed the culture of the UK. And even after everyone was converted to Christianity, you still have today this culture from then of burying someone in the garb that was either ceremonial to them. So you've got priests buried in their finest robes and that kind of thing. You've got highborn people, especially born in their finery and buried in their finery. You would have a sort of Sunday best that someone would then be chosen to be buried in. You're going to bury someone in a suit, rather than potentially, depending on the type of person they are, obviously, but you're going to bury someone in a nicer outfit than maybe their gardening gloves and their scrubby jeans that they wear on Sunday, that kind of thing. So that's purely observational, and it's one of the ones that we may never be able to kind of disprove. But it kind of is intriguing to me that we can kind of take today's habits and today's assumptions and today's norms, like what you would choose to bury someone in is their best clothing, and you can take that all the way back through time to 1,500 years ago and expect similar behaviour, basically, from our ancestors as we might do today, which is really nice, sort of through line. And then this is my favourite one, which kind of draws together a bit of all of them, in that there's some evidence from reenactors that cruciform brooches just don't work very well at holding up clothing the way that you want them to, and they just fall off. Angular brooches don't. So maybe the fact that we've got more broken long style brooches, like the cruciforms, the small longs, the radial head ones, those kind of things, just means that they broke and fell off more. And then if they were out and about, didn't get recovered and then have stayed in the household and then get back again. Versus the annular ones, the ones that literally are the ones that hold up their dresses, that are more reliable, are the ones that would be worn every single day and the ones that therefore can follow them into the grave on any of their dresses, because those are the ones that you use to keep up to literally keep up with the rest. They're just more reliable, so they're just more used. We've also, what I think is a really nice element of this, the cruciform brooches that we do find in graves. There are some that have been literally sewn onto people's clothing, so sewn onto the dresses, sewn onto the cloaks. The squeeze plates at the back, the catch plates, have been literally like sewn shut or forced closed, so that you could not take that brooch off. So that's a nice little, I think, real world application of the idea that they're just really reliable and they just fall off and that you want them to stay on. And then you get, there's other reasons as well that might come into this. Which I think is, yeah. So there's also other things that we just can't see. Like we wouldn't be able to, for example, see what things get passed down as heirlooms until they finally find them when they're very old, or when there's a kind of a person who is the last of their lineage, maybe they get buried with the family heirloom type thing. So there's a lot of evidence. In particular, there's a chap at Leicester University who I met who had some fascinating research to suggest that there's a huge amount more heirlooms being kept by people in their families from their ancestors, and therefore kept out of the graves than we would ever be able to see. He's got some fascinating evidence to suggest that there's a huge amount of cemeteries across Northern Europe and Southern England, that people were returning to graves and redigging them in order to get back certain heirlooms once their purpose had kind of been served in the burial, maybe only 10 to 20 years after the person had been buried. And this is something that you can really only see if you're looking very specifically at the grave cuts and where the soils change. And there very well might be a huge amount of cemeteries that we just don't have this evidence for because they weren't necessarily expecting to find it. Either that or the soil type's not quite right and the colours weren't quite acceptable enough. But certainly we had some really compelling evidence to suggest that particularly swords and particularly brooches, like the big flashy ones like the cruciform brooches and the long brooches, were specifically items that families were returning for to take out of the graves and take with them and kind of continue their lives with them, which is quite interesting. So these are some things that, yeah, would be amazing to see if we've got better evidence for in the future. It would be amazing if we can tie together some more of these things, like having more settlements found would be great, to be able to see if any of the settlements that we've got are similar, or whether there is a normal settlement type. Because like I said, there's one site where, yeah, they just seem to really like take the brooches. And then if you go to West Heslington, which is a fantastic site where they've got a cemetery and the settlement that was associated with it, sort of side by side, the brooches that they're finding from the settlement are Roman brooches. They're a lot older. They're sometimes 200 years older than the settlement layer that they're in. And they really don't seem to find the same types of brooches that are in cemetery in the settlement. Which again potentially feeds into that thing of if someone loses a brooch in the settlement, you're going to pick it up and go and write it down. And maybe a Roman brooch is just so much of a curio that it's not necessarily being used as a brooch, but it might be being used as a trinket rather than being worn. And so that's kind of a lost item. So there's all sorts of different theories to kind of what it is. But it really does show us that if we're ignoring certain sources of evidence, if we kind of miss what's on the PAS, if we miss what people are bringing into us, then we're potentially missing a huge amount of evidence for life at the time, what people were wearing, what people were doing, things like that. And certainly when it comes to the Anglo-Saxons, because everything for such a long time came to the grave, dress accessories really are one of the most important things that people have been talking about literally for like 100 years about this time. Let's see what we're doing. So yeah, with the PAS as well, we have potential to kind of do more spatial analysis, which I think would be great, but massive caveats also come with PAS in terms of, are people recording accurately enough, where they're finding what they found, when it's, you know, for the majority of people, it's a hobby, so it's a very casual thing. And the PAS doesn't want to make it a ritual thing. The PAS is trying to encourage as many casual hobbies and respecting to go and just record their finds, just so that we've got them on the data set so that we can start to use it in new ways. But it does mean that we do have to kind of take with a pinch of salt some of the data and some of the accuracy in which that comes. But yeah, highly encourage anyone to record their finds, definitely. And then yeah, what would be really nice is to kind of redo this study in another 10 years, or redo this study in comparison with a different area. Because Yorkshire has the benefit of being one of the most well-represented counties on the PAS, but so is Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire is a really well-represented county. Over 100,000 items come from Lincolnshire on the PAS at the moment. Same with Yorkshire, it's got 108,000. I think Lincolnshire's got 120,000. You've also got Norfolk, which again is a really well-metal detected, well-recorded area. Versus if you go just beyond Yorkshire, the other end, you've got in the northeast, I think maybe only 9,000 items that are currently recorded on the PAS. So it would be fantastic to kind of do this again, but in different areas and see on the same representation of the right one way. But yeah, I'm going to leave you kind of with that as a thought, because that's where I am. Thank you very much.
Actually, like brooches, Anglo-Saxon like brooches, you know, Saxon brooches, various times.
Yeah.
Times.
So they would have come under one of my other, they probably would have come into the other category of brooches if they were there. The vast majority did come from the kind of pre-conversion era. So they were all from the sort of 5th and 6th into the early 7th century. There weren't a huge amount that came from beyond the 7th century. But yeah, the vast majority as well were all copper alloy. I think I had 96% odd were all copper alloy. There were very few that were other metals. But again, that would be another deep dive, another really good sort of study to kind of focus in on the children.
Anybody else? Oh, in that case, thank you very much. It's very interesting talk. If anyone's not had an opportunity, do please feel free to look at our Hidden Valley exhibition on the way out, or our archaeology galleries, plenty of Anglo-Saxon objects in both of them. And thank you very much for coming.